Thank you for joining me in question 30 of the Secunda Secundae of the Summa Theologia as we continue on the treatise on theological virtues. This one is about mercy, and unlike the previous two videos where we talked about joy and about peace, which were not virtues, but they were fruits. They are effects of the theological virtue of charity. This is going to be different because mercy is a virtue. In fact, he's going to ask here in a little while, is it the greatest of all the virtues? And in some ways it is, and in other ways it isn't. And remember, all of this is really towards the goal of understanding the dignity of the human person. Okay, so what makes us dignified? And mercy has so much to do with dignity, especially for those that are below us, so to speak, those who need our help, those who are suffering from some kind of evil in one way or another. All right, so Article 1 in these 4 articles, this will be pretty quick. It says whether evil is properly the motive of mercy. Now, you may your initial gut reaction may be, no, it's not evil. These are just people that you're trying to help. But hear Thomas out and how he explains this. He says, as Augustine says, mercy is heartfelt sympathy for another's distress, impelling us to succor him if we can. Succor just means to help him if we can. Accordingly, the motive of mercy, being something pertaining to misery, is, in the first way, anything contrary to the will's natural appetite, namely corruptive or distressing evils, the contrary of which man desires naturally, wherefore the philosopher says that pity is sorrow for a visible evil, whether corruptive or distressing. Okay, so yeah, it has to do with an evil, because when somebody is in distress, when somebody doesn't have food, maybe suffering some kind of emotional or spiritual distress, that's an evil, right? Because it's contrary to our nature to feel that way. So yes, it is an evil. Article 2, whether the reason for taking pity is a defect in the person who pities. Now you're thinking, no, certainly not. I mean, it's not a defect in me just because I have pity on somebody. But listen to what Thomas says here. He says, pity is grief for another's distress. From the very fact that a person takes pity on anyone, it follows that another's distress grieves him. Okay, we feel the distress that person's feeling. Now, this happens in 2 ways. First, through union of the affections, which is the effect of love. For since he who loves another looks upon his friend as another self, counting his friend's hurt as his own, so that he grieves for his friend's hurt as though he was hurt himself. Do you see now why it's a defect in the person, but not a bad thing? Secondly, it happens through real union. For instance, when another's evil comes near to us so as to pass to us from him, whereas those who deem themselves happy and so far powerful as to think themselves in no danger of suffering any hurt are not so inclined to pity. Okay, so if you think you're just, the cat's meow and everything's hunky-dory, you're probably not the person that's going to have pity on somebody because life is just too good. Therefore, there is a defect in a sense. Accordingly, a defect is always the reason for taking pity, either because one looks upon another's defect as one's own, through being united to him by love, or on account of the possibility of suffering in the same way. Article 3, whether mercy is a virtue. And again, like I said, the previous 2 videos were about fruits and not virtues, but Thomas says, yeah, mercy is a virtue. Mercy signifies grief for another's distress. Now, this grief may denote, in one way, a movement of the sensitive appetite, in which case mercy is not a virtue but a passion. All right, a passion isn't dictated by reason. Okay, if I get angry or if I get sorrowful, it in and of itself, that doesn't mean I've applied reason to it. Okay, it becomes a virtue when I apply reason. Whereas in another way, it may denote a movement of the intellective appetite in as much as one person's evil is displeasing to another. This movement may be ruled in accordance with reason. And since it is essential to human virtue that the movement of the soul should be regulated by reason, it follows that mercy is a virtue. So if you see somebody who's poor or suffering or in distress, and you just have that initial emotional reaction to them, that may be mercy, but that's a passion. And then when reason is applied, and maybe you decide you're going to do something, or you're going to help them out, or whatever the situation may be, that's when it can move into being a virtue. Article 4 says whether mercy is the greatest of the virtues. Now, we already know that the greatest of the virtues is charity. So it's not going to be the greatest virtue, but listen to what he says. This is quite interesting. He says a virtue may take precedence of others in two ways. First, in itself. Secondly, in comparison with its subject. In itself, mercy takes precedence of other virtues, for it belongs to mercy to be bountiful to others, and what is more, to help others in their wants, which pertains chiefly to the one who stands above. Okay, so when you see somebody below you, when you see somebody in pain, you help them. On the other hand, with regard to its subject, mercy is not the greatest virtue unless that subject be greater than all the others, surpassed by none and excelling all. Since for him that has anything above him, it is better to be united to that which is above than to supply the defect of what is beneath. Hence, as regards man who has God above him, charity which unites him to God is greater than mercy, whereby he supplies the defect of his neighbor. But of all the virtues which relate to our neighbor, mercy is the greatest, even as its act surpasses all the others, since it belongs to one who is higher and better to supply the defect of another, insofar as the latter is deficient. So, again, I think this is pretty easy to understand, hopefully, that the object of theological virtues is God himself, okay, uniting to God. So those have to be the highest. But when you get below that and you talk about the virtue that we can have where we're doing something good, mercy is going to be the greatest because we're helping somebody below us. And we're not getting anything out of it. In fact, we're uniting their sorrow with ours. And we're feeling sorrowful, right? It's a defect, as he said. So that is the end of this video, and there we go. I'll make myself a little smaller, and thanks for joining me. We'll continue on for another, about 16, 17 questions in this treatise on the theological virtues. God bless you.